Welcome to Boys Don't Cry once again. And after a few weeks of doing so many different things, I am excited once again to have Irma with us. And this is something because to build on the previous conversation we had in terms of educators and the role educators can play in terms of young boys growing up to be men eventually. And we looked at just a very foundational premise of how boys and their mental health and any looking at or experience of abuse at home, how does that impact and what kind of foundation it lays. Today, what I wanted to talk to Irma about was, and I shared this with her, is how classrooms can be safe havens for young boys, even not so young, even all the way up to high school. How can classrooms be or become the safe haven that every boy wants to be part of? Every boy wants to go to the classroom for. Every boy wants to experience the love, the affection, the respect, the adulation, the encouragement that the teacher, the good teachers, showers their students with. So that is why we've got Irma Flores Brothers with us tonight with Boys Don't Cry, another episode. So without further ado, thank you, Irma, for joining me. Let's dive in, shall we?
Let's go. I'm
All
ready.
right. So first up, we talk about safe havens, and I have to bring this term because we use this term in context of adults and mental health and workplace safety. Psychological safety. How important is psychological safety when we talk about kids, when we talk about elementary school kids, middle school kids, high school kids? We understand on a vocational context, but how important is it on a school level for young boys?
So I think that when we look at what's happening in the world, it's much different than when I first started teaching. When I was in the classroom, I was teaching in a bilingual classroom, and the number one rule that I promised I would always have is to establish a safe, risk free environment. Children were coming with limited English ability. So I knew that the risk of those that did speak that were native English speakers might find how they say something as they're learning the language hilarious. And what would that do to the self esteem of the children who are learning? That's particularly doubles, I think, with the risk that boys take in exposing themselves through language for whatever reason. Maybe they're not um, confident, they've not had a good experience. So, if we don't set up those risk free environments, what's going to happen is those children are coming to school, and I won't say excited, I would say probably dreading facing what the possibilities are, that they would be laughed at, made fun of, bullied, harassed. So back in the day when we didn't hear so much of that, it was a different environment. Still, setting up a risk-free environment is very important, but more so now because we're dealing with a lot of hatred and violence and all these other things that our boys have to think about. And I think they're probably raised to think that they should be strong and they should be emotionless and not show anything but what they've learned, and what they've seen is the violence that they have seen, whether it's in games or in the home or in their neighborhoods or on the news. All of this they're exposed to. So seeing that, I think requires educators to think more about, how do I make this space safe for the boys to come in and feel confident about trying, about making mistakes, about not knowing 100% how to respond to something. I think it's if you get that out of the way and realize that it's going to be a work in progress, you're going to go a lot further. Plus, you're going to have mentally safe thinking students, boys in particular, that will feel like they don't have to worry about that. They have enough to think about. Let's provide this safe space for them to learn and grow and be okay for them to make a mistake or to cry or to share feelings. So I think setting up, and that starts at the top. I think the campus as a whole sets that um, expectation that this is a safe place. So it really starts, and it's really hard when that's not established on a campus, and we're leaving it up to certain teachers to be able to deliver for all these students. It's just not. It has to be all of us putting that work in together to create that space.
Right. So you bring up a very good point, and I want to input a question here is it only the students they want to feel that safe space in relation to other students, or they also want to experience that safe space, safe place, that psychological safety in context of their experience and interaction also with the teachers and the staff? Because how important is that we do not exclude the responsibility that is on a teacher to be the harbinger of safety for the student. So a student is not thinking, oh my God, I have to sit in Mrs. Brother's class. Oh my God, what is she going to do to me? So to what extent teachers also need to take it upon themselves that, hey, I might unintentionally be the reason why this kid is not feeling safe in my class, and I need to work on that in addition to taking the flock of students together also.
That's a tricky situation there because I'll be raw and honest with you. There were situations where I was scared to go into that building, not because of the children, but because of the cliques or the other adults or some of the competition between professionals, adults that shouldn't be happening, but carry on to the students. I think that sometimes when you try to be the best that you can be, which we all should always strive and learn from each other and not feel like we're on an island alone, that can provide when we're the only one or we're in the minority trying to establish this for a campus, a safe space for everyone. Sometimes there's some teachers or administrators or staff personnel who I don't know if it's jealousy, if it's intimidation. I'm not quite sure what the issue is, but until we get all of this sorted out and that lead in that district and on that campus brings people together, they have to set the example of being not having favorites or being fair because teachers talk and they carry that stress into the classroom and it comes out in the way they're teaching. You can feel the anxiety of the children. I loved the children being with me, so instead of having them sit out in the hallway waiting for the bell to ring to come in, they were always invited to come into my room, unless I was out on duty in some part of the building. But that was my way to start establishing a relationship with my students by not interacting with them 100% at that moment. I see the interaction student to student, and I can see how they're interacting in a group. I can see how they're individually talking to each other. The topics they're discussing taught me a lot about what the day was going to be like or what a particular student was going through. And I think there again, I insist that if we don't take the time, we are creating children who are feeding negatively off the anxiety that educators carry. I think that our place as educators needs to be in that classroom, needs to be a safe space. Now it's up to the campus leader to set that safe space for the staff to come in and feel supported, feel valued. And that's missing in education. I'm on a Facebook group. Every day I'm reading multiple posts about teachers quitting. I resigned today. I resigned today. And then they'll explain. And a lot of it has to do with the adults and how they're treating fellow teachers or what they're seeing in the interaction with children. And it's a big problem. I think it's a big concern. And I think parents are scared. They don't know who to go to if they don't have a connection in that district or they're new to the district and this is happening. And it's personally happened in my family just recently. My advice is if that child's self esteem and their anxiety is to the point where they don't want to go to school and they're upset all the time and they're crying and you're putting all the pieces together of what's going on and nothing's changing and you're giving that child the tools to be successful, how to respond to situations, and nothing's getting better. It's no wonder a lot of children are being homeschooled. Now, whether or not they're truly being homeschooled, I don't want to say that they are or they aren't because I see a lot of high schoolers, roaming, and this is a pretty nice neighborhood, but where they should be in school. Why are they not in school? What are we doing as parents? Are we removing them just because there's been complaints about their behavior? That's a different issue. But when it's a teacher and a child is so fearful to go to school, afraid of what this teacher is going to say to them or humiliate them in front of the class, we have a major problem. And those administrators need to be in the classroom so they can be watching the interaction of that adult, whether it be a support staff member, a custodian, it doesn't matter. You have to be watching that entire staff and listening to the way they're interacting, how they speak to children. Now, I was known as and I'm going to say this very quickly. You commented about the children who were fearful of, if they were. I was very strict because that's the way I was raised. But along with that came a lot of love, nurturing, valuing, teaching, so that they knew she cares. She's strict, and the kids would describe me as she's strict, but she's so fun, and she makes us laugh, and she loves us. And that to
Right.
me is the greatest gift I can give them.
Absolutely, yes. And those are the teachers that kids would always, let's say a kid has graduated elementary, middle is in high school, and then is coming back to elementary for their sibling. This is the teacher that that kid is going to take extra 5 minutes to go see and say hi because they remember despite of being strict, this teacher was to the point, created a safe space, was warm, compassionate, and kind, and was open to questions and constructive, weird inquiries. So I'm glad you mentioned that. Can you I identify two, three symptoms of two, three indicators of what a safe space looks like. That hey, if this is happening in a classroom, this is a good classroom. If this is happening in a classroom, this is a good classroom. Because after that, I have a follow-up when it comes to boys.
Okay. So I think as administrators in the classroom, which we should be visible, every child should know who we are. I would ask my children, do you know who your parent principal is? No. Do they ever go in the classroom to watch? No. And I had a real hard time with that because I'm thinking, who's watching? Not that teachers need to be watched, but I think we need to support each other, be visible so that the children do feel safe in that classroom. Now you were asking about come at me
Indicators. Indicators of a
indicators.
safe classroom,
Yeah.
a safe
Okay,
classroom for communication, for learning, for questioning, just being, for being.
sure.
Two or
So
three
the
indicators.
teacher When they are teaching or working, facilitating the learning process, you want to see that they're looking at all the children. Typically, not typically, sometimes when I would go and observe in a classroom, I would notice that a teacher would be focusing only on the group that had the answers. And that tells me a lot. They're not confident in who they are or what they're doing or the material that they're delivering. So they have a safe space there to know that these children already have that information and they're going to give it back. So I'm going to look good because these students, but they're not realizing that these other students are being ignored. And children are very bright. They know when a teacher doesn't like them, or they know when they're not being included. So they begin to feel like they're not smart enough. And I think it's the teacher's duty to guide the process of that response. You don't give them the answer, you allow them enough time to stop and think. And just like I modeled here a second ago, they might give an answer and then ask you again, what would it? And that's what you want. You want them to think about what the topic is that we're discussing, what's on their mind. Let them express that. Then they want to make sure that they're responding to your question. So if you model those kind of behaviors, you're going to get students beginning to copy that response. But I think we can tell a lot in the way that when a child answers, what is the facial expression of the teacher? Um, are they cutting them off? Are they not recognizing where they're going with that? Because a lot of times teachers have one response in their mind and they're not listening to the child. And that child arrived at a very logical solution, but that teacher only had her answer that she expected to be given when children have different ways of thinking and of arriving at a solution. So, watching that interaction is so important in the adults, in the student to student. Am I establishing a classroom where children are able to dialogue with each other? Is it just giving me the answer? Do I give them time to discuss and grow from each other? But I think there are a lot of physical signs that tell us it's not healthy. It's not, if you're always crossing your arms, you appear as if you're angry. And children read us like they can read
Open book. Yep.
a game or a game, if they can't read. They can tell. I'd walk into the classroom and sometimes, for some reason I had a sore throat or I didn't feel that well. They knew right away. They were saying, "Miss Brothers, do you feel sick?" They knew, but that's from establishing the different emotions that I would go through and give them time to see how I model different emotions, whether it be I'm upset, I'm disappointed, I'm happy, I'm excited for you, whatever it is. But watching those, when a teacher is one certain way and her response is just flatlined, like no expression, no excitement, there's a time that you need to talk to that teacher and say, let's look at maybe videotaping yourself teaching a lesson and
Right.
how the children are watching you and what they're receiving. Is that what you want? Or are there some areas that you need to grow in?
Right. Perfect. So coming to the next question is, how can we see, are there any verbal cues, any visual cues, physical cues that, okay, I see so and so boy, Johnny. is feeling hesitant. He does not want to ask the question. I know he wants to ask a question, but he's not sure if he wants to actually put that forth. Or maybe Timmy there, he hasn't spoken anything in the last three sessions. Are there any certain cues that teachers, administrators, educators can pick up on to identify that, okay, my class, there's a problem, and I need to identify what the problem is to bring these kids back onto the track?
Just like teachers are read by the students, their emotions when they first walk into that classroom, same thing, you should know your students well enough to know how they're coming in, whether they're upset or not. Are they unusually quiet? Maybe they're more talkative, and today they seem to be awfully quiet. And a solution could be they need to see the nurse. Maybe they have a fever that they don't feel well. But when you see boys that are shy, they shut down, they don't want to ask a question, they don't want to answer a question. Um, I think there are things that you can do based on that individual. If you don't know your students well enough, you could very well hurt them even further by coming across as like encouraging them, but to them, it's you're forcing them to do something at a time that they're not comfortable doing. For instance, I was teaching in a fourth grade gifted and talented group. And something for me that's always been important is allowing students to speak publicly. I love public speaking. And so I think that that's a skill that is lifelong. Speaking, knowing how to approach a stranger and how to have a conversation, or whether it's presenting in a college class. So I started doing that. Well, there were some children who were reluctant. And I said, I want you to experience it. And I explained to them why it was important to have public speaking skills. Um, but I had to know the level of their ambition,
Hmm.
the level of their self confidence. And I had a couple that were terrified. And I said, it's okay. All I need you to do right now is just put together what, you can work with another student if you choose to. Research something you're interested in, and you can just get up there and just talk in a small group if you want to start that way. But the goal was to have them grow to present to the class. And let me tell you, I had a couple of parents call and said, "No, my child's not gonna do that." And I said, "Okay, can you explain to me why?" "Well, they don't feel comfortable, they're scared." And I said, "Okay, what if we just gave them time to watch the others getting up there, presenting, finding out what it feels like, having the other kids excited about it might rub off on your student."
Right.
Well, before long, that student whose mother said there was no way he was gonna do it, was the one that came back and was requesting on every unit we did, was he able to do a presentation.
Wow.
And luckily at that school, I was able to videotape it, and the students could share those presentations with the parents if they weren't able to be there. So we don't put limits on children, but we take it step by step at their comfort level while we are encouraging them and finding ways for them to feel confident, to feel powerful in that they can do this. And the difference, and we know as adults, when we've learned something, I remember learning math, a math problem, how to do something. I would ask the teacher, could she give me more? Because I enjoyed doing it. Um, so I think you just have to be creative. You have to think out of the box, but you have to remember what it felt like. How were you feeling? What were your emotions? I was a nervous fifth grader because we moved to a whole new town. Mom took us to a whole new town. And I was a fifth grader and I was scared to go. I went from a Catholic school to a public school, so I was terrified. And
Wow.
there was a boy there was that would bully me for whatever reason. He didn't like me and all his friends. The girls would say, "I don't know why he always picks on you." I was terrified, but I didn't share with anyone, and that's the problem too, is a lot of our children, if we're not, aware of what's going on, whether it be a situation in another classroom or in ours, when we see students looking down, not talking, crying, almost on the verge of tears, sitting by themselves, not having someone to play with, not smiling, not laughing. We need to get involved. We need to find out what we can do to make this child feel part of this unity, this community of learners.
Right. So what I understand really is just like any other field we are in, it is very important to develop that rapport with the students first couple of weeks of the session so that I understand, okay, Johnny from Timmy to Sandhya to Aslan to Ahmed to Vinny, what ticks each person off, what makes each person happy, what their favorite character might be, the personality behind those names. So very important, just like any other job we do. Very important question is we want to establish safety. We want kids to feel safe and confident to be able to express themselves. But we also want them, just like you mentioned, you were strict. We also want them to understand the decorum of a classroom. So the fine line between discipline and safety of expression, how do we go about defining that for, say, a fourth grader or third grader who has only been in a classroom session, let's say from pre kindergarten one, two, and this is his or her third, fourth year? How do we do that?
You know that you just said three words that I don't think are thought of enough when we talk to educators about how to establish their classroom. Safety in interaction, safety in communication, safety in self expression is not taught. And it's not taught as a skill because there's math, social studies, science, all these other content areas. We establish that by establishing the expectations from day one. And I go back to it has to be the leader of that campus setting that expectation. I was at a campus in another state that was one of the roughest I have ever been to. And we would have Friday morning meetings, the whole program would meet. And they would talk about discipline and expectations, but the way the adults addressed the students created an atmosphere of violence and disrespect. And if we're not respecting each other and we're not respecting children, how do we expect them to respect us? So, establishing from day one and modeling what that looks like. Oh, someone bumped into somebody. Oh, what do you say? Excuse me. That's right. And there's nothing wrong with teaching them what are appropriate reactions. How do we communicate with each other? So I think if teachers would take the time in class meetings, maybe first thing Monday morning, let's set this as a goal. I'm seeing this in the classroom that we're not valuing each other. What does that mean? Find out what children understand about that term and then explain what it looks like. Get their perspective on what it looks like. Role playing is very important. Lexi was going to start middle school in a new district away from me because I had been the campus administrator. And let me tell you, my kids dealt with a lot of bullying because I was the principal. My son was called the principal's narc or something like that. That was his, and so he was kept from playing football until because they didn't, my children didn't want to cause a problem. I had my daughter's teacher who found it important to stress that they liked the old principal better than the new one. And the principal's daughter was in that class. So, they dealt with a lot of hurt because of my position. And I loved having them at my campus, but I did move them out because of sometimes it wasn't fair to them to have to deal with that. Lexi was going to go to middle school, and I said, "Okay, Lexi, this is going to be new for you. How are you going to go up to a group because you don't have, friends?" And middle school's a tough age. It
Yes.
is very there's a lot of pressure there. Girls are learning how to be sometimes mean girls, and they can be vicious. Well, Lexi and I role played, and I said, "What are you going to do?" And she goes, "I'm going to walk up to a group and I'm going to say," and this is Lexi's personality, is she's very outgoing. She's a people person. So she, "I'm going to go up to a group and I'm going to say, 'Hi, I'm new. My name is Lexi.'" And I said, "Okay. And what if they don't say anything?" And she goes, "If they don't say anything, then I'm just going to say, 'Okay.' And I'm going to walk off." And I said, good. It set me at ease not to worry because she was going to know how to take care. But for boys, I think there's that pressure for them to fit in and to be a certain way. And I think with discipline, you have to predict and know, but set an example in a respectful way. Respect is taken out of the classrooms. We don't use it enough to for kids to understand what respect. It's a shame that nowadays we have to say, "Well, what does respect look like to you?" It's either you're polite or you're not. I mean, it's a shame, but it goes to the homes, things going on at home that are
Right.
different than how maybe I raised my children, why we have to teach what respect looks like.
So you bring a valid point. Is it happening? Has it been happening that our schools, where our job as parent, and I tell this to my boys every day almost, hey, my job is to prepare you for life. That's my job, nothing else. This is my top priority to prepare you for life. Are we at a point in last maybe decade or so, or maybe this generation, where we have kind of gotten away from that context, that purpose, that hey, students in school, in elementary, middle, high school, our top priority is to prepare these kids for life. And life is tough. Life is hard. We cannot shelter them. We cannot just put them under an umbrella and just raise snowflakes. So, has that happened where we are molding or changing our behaviors to such an extent, maybe because how the world has changed now, we have become so soft in everything, everyone gets offended, because when we go out in life, it's not going to be like that. So, is it just me who sees that transition, or that has actually happened? And if that is the case, or you as an educator see that, how do we tackle that?
Times are changing, unfortunately, and I think we're not teaching the values in the home as a whole that we were brought up. And I'm much older. I'm older than you, but my dad died when I was a year old in a car accident. So I was raised by a mom who that was it for her. She never dated or anything. So I didn't deal with that kind of situation at home. But she expected a lot from us, and she wanted us to get a good education so we would have a good future. You think about the families now are so broken and spread out, and a lot of parents are focused mainly on each other and the argument between each other and the divorce and this and that. that how much time are we really spending? And I said this last time, we don't sit together at a meal to find out what's happening with the child. And so it's no wonder we read on, in the news or social media where the parent says, I was not aware that my child was hurting. The child's first safe place should be in the home, and it's not. 9 times out of 10, that's a scary place for the children. Maybe it's because their parents are working. It's safe once they get home, but maybe when they get home, there's nobody there. That's a scary situation. Um, it's I think parents need to be educated. I think we need to do more. On my campus, I had parenting classes just because I saw the need. And we need to realize that we're not teaching our children consequences to actions. That's major. There is people on the news right now. I don't know if you've heard about it, but some people that are within the law getting away with some very serious violent acts towards another and not serving any time because a parent has ties to the judge or to someone that's getting them out. What's going to happen to that student or anyone around him that might be the victim that he chooses?
Right.
Your life could be over. And
Yep.
so are we doing enough to ensure that we're talking to our children about how to stay safe? What to do in a classroom when we've seen a lot of shootings and that in schools to the point where it's not even big news anymore. You may just happen to hear about it just as a side note, but we had all the media out covering the first shootings, and now it's like it happens all the time. Do we prepare our kids? What do they do? How do they stay alive? How do they know? One thing my mom taught me is the people you run with determines who you are. So be
Yes.
very careful. I don't hear that anymore. I don't hear those kind of lessons. So I would teach my kids in the classroom those kind of lessons that my mom instilled in all of us so that we were successful in life. I mean, not to say we didn't make mistakes because we certainly did, but we didn't wind up in prison. And I think
Right.
until we start thinking about those values and the morals and the ethical behavior that takes you far in life and instill those in our children as educators and as parents, we're going to continue to see it increasing. And some of it may be some of these very quiet, innocent children are tired of the bullying or whatever's going on at home and they're going to act on it. We had a kindergartner shoot a teacher. That was on the news. Never would we have ever thought that someone that young would have
Wow.
a gun. So, safety in the school, there's so many different levels to creating a safe space.
Right.
It's not
Yep.
just the physical, it's the mental.
So I want to ask you this. Maybe not a detailed rundown, but let's compare two boys. One who sees the classroom as a safe space, the teacher as a guiding star, always looks forward to going to the class, contribute, talk, learn. Other student sees the class as a burden, teacher as a monster, and despises his presence in the class. This mindset, this feeling, this connection slash disconnect, how does that impact their respective trajectories going forward?
So that's going to happen in just about every classroom. And I've had them in just about every classroom. Turn it around. There are some students who it's a cycle. Their dad may have been um, not had a good experience in school, and I had that happen. where I had to call this dad in. And his son was always hitting, fighting with other kids, and I was the principal, and I was always having to call the dad in, and the dad was getting very upset. And so I kept trying to figure out, and I told the dad, I just want to figure out what we can do to help your child. I don't like disciplining them, but they're also not going to come to my office and walk out with a treat, which I hear has happened a lot too. I mean, we're going to do something to help that child turn everything around in a way that they begin to find a reason to want to come to school. Well, this boy had very long hair. It was down to his waist. And
Wow.
and I asked the dad. I didn't know if it was a culture thing, religion. I didn't know. So I asked the dad. I said, "I'm not sure what's going on, but I've been observing, and I noticed that some of the other boys pick on him, and then he's the one that's reacting to them calling him names or laughing at him or whatever. And he's got a reputation, so he's being, sent to the office. I don't know that it's always been his fault." So asked the dad, I said, "Can I ask your son about his hair?" He said, "Yes." And I said, "Okay." I said, "Joe, do you like your long hair?" He broke down, started crying. He said, "No, I don't. The kids make fun of me. They call me a girl. They laugh at me." The dad was shocked. He said, I didn't know. Why didn't you tell me?"
So why did he have long hair?
His dad just thought he liked it. He said, "I thought you liked it."
Wow.
Never did. But something as simple as that turned that boy around. I
Oh
had
my God.
another student in fifth grade who, when I started at that school, I was retired, then went back for a couple of years to work with a special population. And everyone had warned me about him, that he was very aggressive. He would attack people in that. Well, ironically, his dad was the only parent that came to back or meet the teacher night. So I was able to meet him, and when I heard his name, I was like, "Oh, I've really got to work hard to get him on my side." So immediately I said, "Gosh, will you help me learn how we do things at this school?" He goes, "Oh, yes, yes, I'll help you." So he came to school so excited. It ended up he turned out to be one of the leaders. It took a little while, a couple of weeks, because I would see his anger come out.
Mm,
And mind you, he came from a country where there was a lot of violence. So that plays into it as well. His
right.
environment, his experience was all violence, and they escaped from that.
Right.
So just working with him and getting to know him and giving him responsibility turned that boy around. And he was doing so well. And then one day he got upset, and I looked at him, and he had this frown on his face. And it was the sweetest frown I had ever seen. I just wanted to hug him. And he was sitting there so angry, and I thought, "God, this is the point where he would get up and just attack someone." And I looked at him and I smiled at him, and I just said, "It's gonna be okay." And he smiled. It was like you could just see just the weight lifted off his shoulders, like it was okay to feel that way. I wasn't gonna be angry with him. I was okay with him being angry at that moment, but it was, "Okay, let's get on with it. Let's move ahead." He ended up being in charge on a school bus. Like, he was the one to get everyone settled on the bus. He was
Right.
so proud. I missed him when he went to middle school, but he would email me every once in a while, asking how I was doing, and that meant the world to me. So how do we deal with that? We have to know where our children stand, what sets them off, and not assume that they're at fault. It could be the teacher or a student, like knowing their weak side and using that to as a scapegoat to get them into trouble. So I think That's happened, it's gonna continue happening if we don't stop it. But yes, and I think setting those expectations in the classroom that that's not okay. Now, getting a boy to express his feelings is another thing. And how I did it is I would always remove the 2 from the class away from anybody else so they could, like, express what happened and try to work through it themselves.
Right.
And then letting them, sometimes they just had to sit together and figure it out. Sometimes you had to be the mediator, but sometimes it was safe for them to figure out, how do I use my words and my language to express my emotion, to to apologize as well for how I reacted. That'll overcome so many differences and improve discipline in the classroom.
Right. One more question. How do we, and I did, it's going to be before this episode. How do teachers move from a mindset of, okay, you need to fix your attitude, you need to fix the way you talk to me? How do we move from the fix it mindset to heal the behavior mindset? Because I think, and I believe this is very, very important, especially for boys growing up, because there's going to be such a change of personality, expression, the way they express themselves, going from verbal to nonverbal to silence to physical. How do educators, teachers navigate through this shift from a fix it to let's heal it?
Some adults haven't learned it yet.
Mm,
It's incredible how the adults will um, act in a situation like they hold that grudge for a long time. And I think that those teachers that say, fix your attitude now, you can't turn it off. It's something that happened that is valid. And if we don't value our children enough to give them an opportunity to say, how did that make you feel? I agree. I would be upset too. So that we're validating emotions that are appropriate at the appropriate time in the appropriate way. But when we just say, fix it, well, maybe somebody has hurt me or touched me or pushed me or something. Well, how am I going to fix that? That's your job to fix it. It's the adult's job. And that just goes again to the whole environment on a campus or in a setting. What do we allow and how do we model? I was always honest with my students. If I drove to work and someone cut me off or something, I would say, "I was so mad." And then I had to stop and think, "I've got to focus on the road and I can't be mad at that one." So as we develop those kind of scenarios for the children to listen to and learn from, we're taking the time to help build skills that are lifelong skills. It's okay to be angry. It's okay to cry. I was a crier in 5th grade, and my mom didn't make me feel bad. She would encourage me to get out of the car because I had to go to school. But, you know, we deal with so many behaviors that sometimes we're not mature enough to handle or we haven't been taught. Some adults have anger issues. And I would say they need to get counseling to be working with children because sometimes you're having an argument, at home with your husband and you bring it to school. Are you going to be angrier more with the males? I had a professor in college. She didn't like females. She was more partial to the males and our grades showed it. But
wow.
that's life. That's like you said, sometimes you have to deal with that. But I think there comes a time when there are things that children should not have to deal with. Bullying from an adult or bullying, what that looks like, we have to stop and listen to them so that we know to what degree is this bullying. Is it to the point, and we can't say, oh, he called you that. That's not really bullying. To that child, it may have been. If they're sick to their stomach and they're scared to come to school, that to me, it's a physical reaction. That to me deserves time to figure out what's happening and how are we going to stop this, because that cannot
Right.
happen.
Right. As we close it now, and this can go on forever and ever, but we're going to keep it crisp and short so that we can come back with another topic of as we talk about educators. Now, putting together all your experience from different parts of your life, top of the list being an educator, being a mom, being a grandmom, one piece of advice to teachers, to administrators on how they can create that culture to where a second grader can see a staff member, he or she can walk up to that person and say, Mr. Khan, I have a problem. I need to talk to someone. One advice, a very simple one, doesn't have to be rocket science, that any educator can just pick on and try to execute, try to practice themselves to create that safe space, at least around them for their circle of influence.
If you can't take it as an individual, you shouldn't be giving it out. For instance, as a parent, how would I want my child treated? I always go into it with that mindset. How would I want my child to be responded to in a classroom or anywhere? That's how I should be responding to all children. Um, you know, I keep saying it starts at the top, and it does, because principals have the luxury of establishing the culture in that building. And if all of us as adults, no matter what position you're in, can admit that sometimes we make mistakes, we have faults, whatever, and apologize and fix it in a way that, when I say fix it, we have the mentality and maturity to use that opportunity to grow from, then we begin to create a culture of safety for all children where they're going to feel safe. If I It's like a mom and a dad. Some children feel safer going to the mom because the dad overreacts, or the dad, is going to get upset, or they feel, maybe the daughter feels better going to dad because she's daddy's girl and he'll do anything, and mom falls apart, breaks down, starts crying, so they don't want to come to her. You know, they teachers set their reputation, and I would want to ask them, what is your reputation? Are you the type of teacher that children go up and hug? Are you the type of teacher that students are scared of? Um, I think we have to look within ourselves. We have to imagine what it's like being that age, and how would you feel if that was your son and you were speaking or watching someone speak to your own child like that. We 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 are very protective of our children, and I think no matter where we are or what our background is, we want to protect our children. So I think going in with that mentality that these are my children at school, they're all my children, and whatever I can do to send that love and that nurturing and that care and valuing children and respecting them is what we need to really focus on, because when we don't, how do we expect them to learn when we're accusing them, or we don't know the facts, but we're going to listen to this large group who made accusations because now this child has become labeled the scapegoat, and so you
Right.
can do whatever you want and just say it's him. Teacher goes with it because she doesn't want to take the time to find out who these children are and what's really going on. So parents are dealing with a lot, and they're scared. They're scared of the outside world coming in to hurt our children. They should feel safe sending their children to school, and that school being as safe a place mentally and physically as it can possibly be, in which it should be.
Absolutely. Nope. Completely agree there. Classrooms as safe havens, safe places, and I cannot but think of our one principal out of all the teachers, all the educators, while you were saying a lot of stuff, only one person came to my mind. A few others, but this one gentleman, top of the list, an Australian guy running a Pakistani school, and his name was James E. Last. I mean, drop dead handsome guy. I mean, I cannot imagine how handsome he would be in his 20s and 30s. His door would always be open for students. I was in that school in ninth grade, eighth grade, end of eighth grade, ninth grade. His door would always be open. If he would be walking around the school and a student would stop him, and then a staff member would come, he would not stop his conversation with the student. He would continue his conversation with the student till the time student was satisfied. And then once the student would walk away, then he would attend to the staff member. And that instilled that level of confidence in kids, in us, that we're like, all right, you know what? I have a problem. My teacher cannot solve my problem. I'm going to go to Mr. Last. Boom. That was our perception. Well, you
Mhm.
can't take care of it. I'm going to go to Mr. Last, and he would sit there all day. He would listen to kids. So that is the kind of individual. I'm talking about 1994. Okay, I have
Mhm.
no problem aging myself here, and I still remember that guy. May God, I mean, may his soul rest in peace. But those are the kinds of teachers that we want to have in the lives of our kids. So, thank you very much, Irma. Again, a
Thank you.
fascinating session. 40, 45 minutes is not enough for this topic even.
Right.
So hopefully we're going to come back with some other follow-ups, some other questions that I already have. And yeah, as Irma said, treat every kid in your classroom as if it's your kid sitting in someone else's classroom. That is how you should be taking care of your classroom, that you are not teaching this class, but you are a student in someone else's classroom, and how you are feeling when the teacher is saying something, being mean or being polite or being pleasant or being unpleasant to that kid. Because kids pick up things. Their record button is always on. They are recording. They're a black box, which is always recording. And we don't know when that recorded material comes out to cause problems in later years of their lives, because it is very, very important that we take care of that part. Before we call it a night, any parting ways, Irma?
No, I just in watching the news and hearing all about education, things going on, and talking to friends, we have a lot of work to do. And I think through these discussions helps me to reflect on, I still have years left in me. It makes me want to go back. It's just a shame in Texas, once you retire, there's a penalty for hiring a retiree. And I just don't understand that. It is a shame that we're going to penalize a district if they hire a retiree,
Wow.
because I have a lot that I could give, and I try to stay active with it, education. But I just hope and pray that we can fix things. It's going to take some minds that are experienced in the classroom to turn things around and help parents raise children.
Absolutely. Hands down, one of the most difficult things to do because my son asks me this question every 3 months. Is being a parent hard? Yes, it is
It
darnest
is.
hardest thing in the world to do. With that thought, thank you very much, Irma, once again for
Thank you.
gracing Boys Don't Cry. And yes, boys do cry. It is perfectly fine for boys to cry if that means they are expressing their pain and hunger
Absolutely.
and motivation and despair and channeling it into energy and power and strength and motivation and discipline. Till next time,
Absolutely.
thank you very much, Irma. And I'm going to sign off from Boys Don't Cry. Take very good care of yourselves.